Right. Man, welcome, welcome, welcome. How many of you walked in this morning and you were a little bit out of sorts today? How many? Just raise your hand. Okay, absolutely. How many of you like this? How many of you like this? All right. Now, don't worry. We're not going to do this every week, right? Because some of you, I know some are like, I love this. Some are like, please don't ever do this again, whatever. When we do things like this, I know that's the case. I know what happens. But this morning, I am so thankful that you decided to join us today. I think this morning will be a day that you will remember for a very, very long time. A very long time. In fact, I had the vision of this a few months back when I was wanting to think about and preach about and talk about just some things that God has put on our hearts as the leadership of this church. And really, what I envisioned and saw is what's happening this morning is like a living room type talk, right? If you could sit down in someone's living room and just enjoy being together, you'd be surrounded, you'd be around, and you would be sitting down. You wouldn't be on a stage, you'd be on one level. We're talking this morning. And so that's the vision and the heart behind this morning. And some of you don't you get to see my backside, right? And so, no, I'm just kidding. No, that's not a good thing, truthfully. But so I apologize that that's the case this morning. But again, I want you to look across the room to the other side this morning. See, that is the church. That's the church, friends. The church isn't a thing that is a organizational ideal in that it's just a business or it's just a way to make money or a way to whatever. The church, as Jesus describes us, is a body with many parts, with many spots, with many things. Some of us are going to be legs. Some are going to be feet. Some are going to be the mouth. I'll let you figure out who that might be this morning. But anyway, that's the body this morning, and that's what I'm excited about today. And this morning, we're beginning a series where we're going to go on a journey together. Now, when you go on a journey, how many of you, when you have your family and you're going on a journey, that can sometimes be a difficult thing, right? You might know how this works. You get your kids in the car. You're all excited. They got their drinks. They got their stuff. They're all situated, and they're all ready to go. They're all excited. Now, my kids don't fight, but maybe yours do, right? But they sometimes will do that. They'll say, I want that, right? Reminds me of a story I heard a while back about a family who was going on a long road trip, and they had two sons. We'll call them Chip, and we'll call him Chad, right? No relation here. Chip and Chad. Chip is 5, Chad is 4. And they're about to get into the car, and Chip, the younger one, Chad, the younger one, I get this right here. The younger one says, I want the left side. Now, you know what's going to happen next. If you have kids, the other brother says, no, I want the left side, right? Like, I want it. And so they start arguing and fighting. I want the left side. No, I want the left side. No, I want it. No, I want it. Not fair. You had it last time. You know how it goes, don't you? They're arguing about who gets the right side or the left side and such. And finally, Dad says, I've had enough. That's it. Chip, since you're the oldest, you get the left side. And he goes, yes. He's so excited because he won. And then he says, Dad, which one's the left side, right? And so he didn't even know which one that it was. He didn't know what he was fighting over, right? And so you're probably wondering this morning what we're doing here and why this is the case this morning. You might have walked in today and you were a little out of sorts. And for the most part today, we didn't talk a whole lot about what was going to happen this morning because a little bit I wanted to mess with you. Now, I've been the pastor here for about 9 years. You don't get to do this a lot as the pastor, right? You don't get to mess with people a whole lot before they say, that's it, we're done, right? And so we only get a couple of these things every once in a while. This is one of those this morning. But I did want to mess with you just a little bit because you walked in today and your spot was not there. You were out of sorts. You didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know what to expect. You sat down. It was a different kind of experience. Friends, that is the case for a lot of people that walk into churches across America every single Sunday morning. And I would even add further to that, not even that walk into churches, That's the case for a lot of people that would never even darken the door of a church. They would say, what do I do? Where do I go? How does this work? I don't understand this whole thing. And so this morning, I want you to think about that because I want you to think differently about church. Here's a question I want to pose to you. Why do we do this? Why do we come to church? Why are we a part of this? What's the purpose? What's the point? Maybe you don't think about that question a whole lot. I think about that question almost every single week. Why do we do this? Why do we come? Why do we make this decision? Why do we walk in? Why do we do this? And see, it's an important question. Now, if you've been around with us for a while, you know we have a mission statement. We're here to make it simple for people to find and follow Jesus, right? That's our mission. That's our purpose. That's our goal. That's our aim as a church body, to make it simple for people to find and follow Jesus. Because truthfully, finding and following Jesus is the greatest thing on the planet, isn't it? It's the greatest thing that there ever was. Finding and following Jesus is incredible. Why is that incredible? Listen to what Jesus says in John chapter 15, verse 5. And today I've got my glasses so I can read out of my Bible, because today I'm even doing my notes differently. And so I wrote them out in a map form that could be good or bad. We'll see it today. But anyway, I just want to talk today. John chapter 15, verse 5, and it says this: I am the vine, and you are the branches. Jesus says he is the vine, and we are the branches. Now, I want you to think about what that means to today. You probably heard this ideal. You've heard this read. You've read it. You've thought it. You've preached it. You've not. You've taught it. Whatever you might have done it today. But I'm sure this is not the first time that you have heard or thought of this verse. If you're a longtime believer, if you're a brand new believer, maybe you've never heard this idea before. But Jesus says he's the vine. And again, as a result of that, we are the branches. What does that mean? Well, that means something. It's not just a nice idea. It's not just a nice thought. Jesus is illustrating a very important point to all of us when he says, he's the vine, we are the branches, and if you remain in me, he says, you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Now, you could come to church, right? You could, do even churchy or Christian things, right? But if you are not abiding in him, the reality is you could be doing all of these wonderful things, but if you're not abiding, if you're not in him, what the word tells us, you can do nothing. You can have all the vision in the world. You can have all the good ideas in the world. And I'll tell you, our world is full of believers and Christians that have an awful lot of good ideas. They have a lot of good ideas. They have a lot of thoughts and ideas that make a lot of sense, that really sound good. But what Jesus promises us here is that we abide in him, something happens that means something. It means that something's going to take place. Now, we know, you know the word, and you know in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 to 23, what the Apostle Paul does is the Apostle Paul takes this idea and he explains it. It says, if you remain in him, there's some things that are going to grow on the branches of your life. They are, as we would know, the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, that was not the same version, right? That's how I memorized it, but you get the idea. 9 incredible things. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. 9 absolutely incredible traits. Have you ever found yourself in a place at some point when you have been in a spot where you needed one of these things, and you reached down deep behind you and you said, man, right now I need some more self-control? And you've reached down deep and you said, man, I've reached and I've tried to pull it up, but I can't get it. I've tried all my life to try to be more self-controlled or more loving or more joyful or more peaceful, more faithful, more kind, more all of these things. I've found in my life moments too where I've said, God, I want them, and I've reached down deep in my life. I've reached down deep in my heart, and they're not there. Why? Because these things are not a work you reach for. These things are a fruit that grows on your life when you are in Him. Amen? Amen. That's what the Bible tells us about these things. They're fruit, they're not works. Can you imagine a church body, a church people where this is happening, where this is growing consistently all the time? Where love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Imagine a people where this is happening. It'd be a world-shaking, impact-making, culture-changing people, wouldn't it? Do you realize this morning, that when Jesus sent out His disciples, He sent them out into a world that was extremely hostile to how they saw the world and they thought, and yet those people, that ragtag group of people, right? No money, no clout, no position, no authority, weren't educated, not that smart, right? I mean, all these things, they were probably pretty young. Most people believe they were probably in their mid to late teens in this stage of their life. So they don't have long time authority. They're just people that Jesus calls. And yet He sends them out into the world, and they change the world so much so that of the billions of people on the planet today, there are 33% of them that are following Jesus in every corner of the world. How in the world can that happen? Now think about this in context of our world right now. Because again, in our culture, in America, right, there's a lot of people that are Christians, but yet the reality is that the statistics tell us that our numbers are not growing. In fact, they are lessening and such. And this is not about that this morning. What this is about today is this about the fact that sometimes as believers, we can feel powerless to do what God called us to do. Amen? I've thought it before too. Like, God, how in the world are we going to do this? You've called us to something, God, and I believe it, and it's good, but how is it going to happen? But think of the disciples. Think of how they did it. Because, friends, our vision must be Jesus' vision. Has to be. Our vision cannot come, it has to work alongside of it. Cannot come in a spot where it comes against it. Our vision must be Jesus' vision. And if we do and understand Jesus' vision, we'll understand how in the world this ragtag bunch of people were able to do what they were able to do. You know how they did it? They had a call from Jesus that they obeyed. That's it. Now, I want to dive into this morning for a little bit, because they were filled with the Spirit. They obeyed Jesus. And it really is that simple. If you would today, read with me this morning in the Great Commission, Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 through 20. We've talked about this a lot recently. If you've been with us at all, you know it's been a thing. We've been leading up to this point for a while, and so I believe repetition is a great teacher, and so we've been repeating this a little bit, because I think it's really important we get this, but there is a word or a phrase in here that I'm willing to bet that many of us have not caught before. Let's read it this morning. Therefore, it says, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And now this part is massively important. Because a lot of times we say, God, what do you want us to do? Lord, what are we supposed to do in the world? Like, how does this work? What are we supposed to accomplish? Why did you put us on this planet? Well, what we see here is the call that these disciples responded to, and it's the same call we have today, which is to go in the world, make disciples. How? By baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And he says, surely I'm with you always, even to the very end of the age. I don't care how bad things get. I don't care how good things get. I don't care what the world looks like. I don't care what the world doesn't look like. We have a promise from Jesus that says, hey, this is the call. If you walk in this call, right, I will be with you always until the very end of the age. Friends, they changed the world because they answered the call. Amen? And answered the call in terms of two actions, which truthfully are a little bit surprising. Two things, baptizing them. That's the first one, right? Now, what does baptism mean? Baptism means that they got a new identity. This is all about a new identity, and truthfully, in those days, in the New Testament believers, if you got baptized, and you know this, if you don't know this, it's true, and you'll find this out, but if you got baptized as a New Testament believer, this meant something. You were getting baptized probably in a place like the Jordan River or something where people would see you and they would understand that this is different, and you couldn't hide in a church building. You couldn't hide in a house. It was out. It was seen, and you were identifying with something fresh and new. So what Jesus does, he says, baptize them. They need to see that they have now a new identity. Can you imagine if you understood the power of this understanding in all of our lives as well? It's not a matter of positive thinking or, mind over matter. It's nothing like that. When you identify with Jesus, when you identify as someone whose life has been transformed and changed, when you understand and finding and following Jesus gives you fruit and puts fruit in your life and gives you love, joy, peace, patience, etc., etc. When you understand how this works, why else in the world could you ever possibly do anything but answer his call? Well, the reality is that a lot of people tried to do that, so we're going to get into that here a little deeper this morning. So there's the first part, and then number two, he said, teach them to obey. Man, I want you to think about that phrase. Teach them to obey. Now, if you're going to teach someone to obey, that means you yourself have to understand first how to obey, right? And then you have to teach the person that you are teaching not what to obey as much as it is how to obey. Do you understand the difference this morning? Because it really is a big one. So I want to take some time on this one today. The obedience versus knowledge. Let's imagine today that obedience and knowledge are, let's say this is a wrestling ring, and in this corner weighing in at 640 pounds is obedience. In this corner weighing in at 640 pounds is knowledge. They're both behemoths. They're both strong. They're both powerful, and they're going to wrestle. And which one is going to take us to the championship? Which one's going to be the one as the bell rings and they get to the middle and they start duking it out? Which one is it going to be that's going to take us away or take us to the spot that we need to be? And to answer that question, I want to ask you a question. If you're a parent, which one would it be when you have kids? Let's say you tell your kids something, you give them a clear command, and you say, son, daughter, what I want you to do is I want you to clean your room. Imagine this with me for a moment, that your son or daughter says, okay, dad, okay, mom, I get it. That's a good thought. That makes a lot of sense to me. Sure. Let me learn all about what that means. Let me go to my room for a moment, and I'm gonna study, and I'm gonna learn what it means to clean my room. In fact, I've got books, I've got teachers, there's YouTube videos, there's all kinds of things that I'm going to use. And so, Dad, my promise to you is as a good son, I'm going to learn all there is to learn about cleaning my room. Everything. I'm going to learn how to mop. I'm going to learn how to dust. I'm going to learn how to wash the windows. I'm going to learn how to do everything. What if your son or daughter responded to you like that? What would you do? You would say, son, daughter, that's not what I asked you to do. Not that knowledge isn't important. Not that I don't want you to know how to clean your room. But for you to clean your room, the very first thing you have to do is to do what? Obey. You need to obey what I told you to do. This is what you do. You go into your room and you obey and you do it. Friends, this is the problem that we so often have in the modern American church is we think following Jesus means to learn about Jesus, not to obey what he told us to do. Because what would be more beneficial to your children in becoming experts at cleaning, not learning all there is to know about cleaning, but to do it? I remember when I was a kid, I learned how to ride a bike. There's a lot of things about bike riding that I had no concept of when I started riding. I didn't know how to balance. I didn't know how to pedal. I didn't know how to turn. I didn't know how much turning like this was going to hurt. I just didn't know. I didn't know how to do jumps. Now, as I got older, and much to my mom's, chagrin, when I would learn, I got better at it, I would stand on my seat, and I would literally be riding and put my foot on my seat, and I'd ride like this, right? My mom would watch me, and she couldn't believe it. You don't do those things, though, by learning how all about them, do you? See, what happened was I had to first obey the very first command. And that was just start pedaling. You know what happens sometimes in with Christians? Is you say, God, I'll pedal, but I got to learn all about the pedaling first. I got to learn where it's going to take me. I got to learn, like, if I pedal this way, I got to learn all about that. And if I learn about it and I master it, well, then maybe, or then I will listen or I will obey. And friends, the reality this morning is this. We can't think like that because knowledge of Jesus doesn't transform lives. What Jesus is telling us here in the Great Commission is that obeying Jesus transforms lives. Obeying Jesus is what changes. So knowledge versus obedience, which produces life? You know what our greatest need is? It's not to know more about Jesus, but to hear and obey what he has already told us to do. Now, here's the deal about that, because that's a sneaky truth. Because you say, well, so knowledge doesn't matter? Like, it doesn't matter? I just take a jump and whatever, that's how this works? No. I didn't say that whatsoever. In fact, knowledge is not a bad thing. Knowledge is good. Knowledge is helpful. Knowledge is a massively important thing. In fact, Proverbs 19:2 says, desire without knowledge is no good. Desire with no knowledge, that's what the New Living Translation says. It says, desire without knowledge is no good. So please, do not misunderstand me this morning to say, well, knowledge doesn't matter. Knowledge is a problem. Knowledge is the enemy. I didn't say that at all. Knowledge is a wonderful thing. However, knowledge is not how you disciple others or how you are discipled by Jesus. You are discipled and you disciple others by doing what? Teaching them to obey. And it's interesting, he says, because he says, then I'll be with you always. And I'll be with you always. And he says, even until the very end of the world, at the end of the age, I'll be with you at that point. See, again, knowledge is not bad, but knowledge does not make disciples. Obeying makes disciples. You see, I think a lot of people are stuck in their relationship with Jesus because they haven't understood what this meant. You know why? Because you have never been discipled on what it means to obey Jesus. Now, you might know a lot about him, but the reality is, every one of our greatest world travesties of wrong teaching, right? All these things happen from people who know a lot about God. They have come up with some crazy things. People who know a ton about God, they have made some incredibly crazy, strange, weird travesties in teaching, because knowledge does not save us. Jesus saves us, and knowledge doesn't change us. It's obeying him that changes us. This is what he meant to his disciples in John chapter 14, verses 15 through 21. Let's go ahead today and jump and read there. He says this, if you love me, keep my commandments. And I will ask the Father, he'll give you, he says, another advocate, the Holy Spirit, to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world can't accept him, it says, because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and he will be in you. It continues here, and it says next, I will not leave you as orphans. I'll come to you before long. The world will not see me, but you'll see me because I live, you also will live. On that day, you'll realize I'm in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Now get this next part. Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be known by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them. Obedience makes disciples of Jesus. What it says right here is it talks about how obedience is so massively important. And so what is the point of this? A strong house, a strong church, a strong person understands the call. That is, the call is to make disciples who make disciples. The call is to make disciples who understand what it's like to obey Jesus. Friends, we have a mission. We have a mission this morning. Now, you've been with us at all over the last 9 years. You know this church has changed immensely in 9 years. And if I could have had all you in my living room 9 years ago, I think the message, I think the thing I would want to tell you is what I'm going to tell you this today and next week and the following week. So that's in many cases why I wanted to do this and have a living room talk. But if you've been with us for a while, you know we've been working and God's been building something incredible. He's been building a house here. It's been awesome. It's a strong house. God's done some amazing things. And now the mission is being further changed, because we're not changed. It's being encouraged. Let me just jump in here this morning before I get too far. And you have got today a little bridge, and you can see up here there's a bridge, and there's the call God's put on our lives is to be bridge builders. I believe that God's put us in a position, in a place as a church where we can build bridges to this community. Can you imagine a church that understands the call is to go into the world, preach the gospel, make disciples? How? By teaching them to obey Jesus and all he's commanded. Friends, that's a church that's building bridges to his community. And we envision a church that is distributed across bridges. And if we do that, can you imagine what could happen if this church became a movement of disciple-making disciple makers? Can you imagine what could happen if we as a church body got winds or began to understand that our call on this planet is not just to know more about God, but to obey him and to teach others to obey him? Can you imagine what could happen if we, as a body of believers, grabbed hold of that call and grabbed hold of that thing and said, my call is to make disciples who make disciples? Friends, we could start a movement across this region that could literally change the world. You know what think of the politician that frustrates you most. Now, I won't say a name because that doesn't matter. But think of that person. You know what they need? They need someone in their lives who can teach them how to obey Jesus. You know that? If they had that person, if they had someone like that in their lives, it could be different for them entirely. Friends, that's the call. That's the idea. How do we do this? We're going to talk a lot about the details on this next week. Yes, I know that's a little bit bait and switch, but it's not entirely bait and switch this morning, because I want this morning to end and to focus on the biggest thing this morning. As you would stand with me across this room, across this place today, as the band comes back this morning, the call is simple. We envision a church distributed across bridges. My job is to equip you Ephesians 4:12 tells me as a pastor that my job is to equip the saints to do the ministry. We have a mission to help people find and follow Jesus. How? By making disciples who make disciples. You're like, well, pastor, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a disciple maker. I'm not this. I'm not that. You can say all these things. Well, I'm this. I'm that. I'm not this. I'm not that. But my challenge to you this morning is this: to think differently about your relationship with the church. Because if you've seen yourself as a person who just comes to put in some money or just to help here and there when it's convenient for you and easy for you, and that's the whole thing, and the ministry, the real ministry is left to the professionals. If that's how you see your experience in church, I want you today to consider changing your relationship with the church. What is your relationship? Look across the aisles today. What's the purpose? What's the point? What's the idea? There are people in this room that need you to teach them how to obey Jesus. There are also people outside the four walls of this church that need you to teach them how to obey Jesus. They literally have no idea. Now, there's a lot of people that know a lot about God or a lot about Jesus. In fact, in our culture nowadays, there's a thing called deconstruction, which most often is people that grew up in a church, that grew up in a place where they know a ton about Jesus. And they've learned all there is to know, but they've never learned what Jesus says is the most important part, and that is to obey, how to obey Jesus. They're like, well, Pastor, how do we do this? This all sounds great. This all sounds amazing, but I don't know how to do this. It's really hard for me. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm glad you asked the question. That's why we are shifting some things in our church. We are moving some directions. We're going to start pulling in a very, very unified, very strong way towards one mission and one goal, and that is to make it simple for people to find and follow Jesus. How? By teaching them how to obey Jesus. We have 7 simple questions we are moving our groups into across the board in this church over the next number of months and years that puts us in the Word together, and that puts us in a position where we have to ask the exact same question of ourselves, each other, every time. What does this mean? What is God saying to me? What is he saying about people? And what do I do about this? You're like, that's 4 questions. Well, I'll come back next week. If you've not been to Freedom yet, if you've been to Freedom, you kind of get this. A lot more about that next week, but the idea is we put people in a laser focus for learning what it means to obey Jesus. Do you think that God has a way to be able to speak to people's lives in our groups? When we open the Word together as a church, we say, let's see what God might tell us. Can God speak to people in those real-time moments to show them how to obey Him in that moment? Can He do that? Absolutely. Now, I'm not telling you this morning that all these other things we've done to this point are bad. In fact, they're good. They brought us here. But the next thing that God's called us to is not just to pull in many directions. It's to pull in one direction and pull people towards Him, learning how to obey what He's told us. I think that when we put people in a position, who knows what God can do? I envision that there are people in this room this morning that God's put it on your life to start groups outside of the church, where you pull 4 or 5 or 10 people from your community and you say, let's open the Word together and let's just see what it might say. And you're going to lead people to Jesus around your table. Is it possible? We want to give you the way. And again, these are not just like, this is what we're going to do as a church. There's people in this room that say, I don't know how to read the Bible. I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to do these things. Well, our groups are going to show us how to do that. And it's what we should be doing anyway. I say, God, I don't want to cry this morning. God, I want to cry this morning. Can I be honest with you this morning? I've been so nervous for this day for months. Because I want you to think differently about what it means to be the church. During COVID, man, now I'm going off topic here, but I think I need to. During COVID, God spoke to me very clearly. When we were considering having to go and we didn't know what to do during COVID time and we had to shut down for a while. I don't know if you remember this, but we tried for a season to get like small groups happening on Sunday mornings in houses. It didn't work and all that stuff. Long story, but God spoke to me and said, Steve, the church is not ready to be dispersed. And that was not just this church, that was the church. And I promised the Lord that time that I'm going to do something about that. And if I have to die trying, I will die trying. I don't want a machine. I don't just want something to grow huge. I don't just want that. I don't want to be famous. I don't. I want Jesus famous. And I want you to know how to disciple somebody else. That's why I want us to pull together. That's why I want us to teach each other what it means to find and follow Jesus. Would you bow your head and close your eyes this morning? Again, if you would say, Pastor, I still am not completely sure and clear on how we're going to do this. I understand that this morning. Again, my point today is not to do that. Next week will be very, very practical and clear, I promise you. But today, I wanted you to be brought to a position of some uncomfortability when you say, I think I might need to answer the call. Well, what does that mean? Jesus, I'm going to obey you. Make me a disciple maker. I promise you have a plan. I promise you we'll talk about that. But I don't want you to think about that right now. I want you to think about the call God's put on your life. Years back when I answered the call to ministry, was at Lake Geneva Christian Center at the altar, and God said, Steve, I want you to go into ministry. I answered the call, and then I had to do it again at my youth group, and then I had to do it again in college because I had a hard head. But the reality is I had to answer the call. I want you to do the same. I don't mean that you're going to go into full-time ministry, although you might. I'm not anticipating you're going to go across the seas, although you might. I'm not anticipating you're going to go into ministry full-time and preach, although you might. But you have a call, and you have a ministry nonetheless. What is it? To help people learn how to obey Jesus. We're going to worship God this morning. No fanfare. We've unplugged today because, again, I want you to answer this call this morning. So would you have a minute with the Lord, and we'll close in a moment. Would you have a minute with the Lord as the worship team plays? To say, Jesus, I answer the call across this room. Jesus, I pray that as people's hearts, Lord, are stirred by this word, hopefully today, Jesus, I pray that you would cause us to answer the call that you put on our lives this morning. Let's worship him.